The sun rose over the small Midwest town, its golden light filtering through Eleanor Thompson's kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn linoleum floor. At 68, Eleanor moved with the ease of habit, her hands grinding coffee beans, releasing a rich, nutty aroma that filled the air. The kitchen was a time capsule of her 42 years with Henry. Chipped blue mugs on the counter, faded floral curtains fluttering in the breeze, a scratched oak table where they'd raised 3 children through laughter and tears. Every corner held a memory, a testament to a life built on love and resilience. Henry shuffled in, his flannel shirt slightly untucked, his gray hair catching the morning light. "Smells like heaven, Ellie," he said, his voice a warm gravel that still stirred her heart after all these years. She handed him his mug, their fingers brushing, a ritual as steady as the sunrise. They settled on the porch, the July air heavy with summer warmth, a distant lawnmower humming like a heartbeat of the town. Eleanor sipped her coffee, its bitterness softened by a touch of cream, and watched Henry scribble plans for their granddaughter Lily's 10th birthday. "Bounce house again?" Henry asked, his pen scratching a battered notepad, his straw hat resting beside him. "Lily went wild for it last year." Eleanor smiled, her silver braid glinting as she leaned back in her wicker chair. "And my chocolate cake? Extra frosting, of course. She'd never forgive me otherwise." Henry chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a sight that still made Eleanor's chest ache with love. "You spoil her, you know," says the man who bought her a kite. "She can't even fly yet," Eleanor teased, squeezing his hand. His skin was warm, rough from years of tending their garden, a comfort she'd never imagined could vanish. They talked easily, their voices weaving through familiar topics: Sarah's new job at the library, David's latest home repair project, the tomatoes ripening in the backyard. They avoided mention of Michael, their eldest, whose addiction had cast a shadow over the family for years. Eleanor pushed the thought away, focusing on Henry's laugh, the way he leaned forward, animated about Lily's party. "We'll string fairy lights in the yard," he said, sketching a layout. "Make it magical for her." Eleanor nodded, picturing Lily's wide grin, unaware that these moments with Henry were slipping away like sand. The morning unfolded in quiet rhythm. Henry finished his coffee and headed to the garden, his straw hat bobbing among the tomato plants. Eleanor watched from the kitchen, washing dishes, the clink of plates grounding her in the familiar. She smiled at his muttered curses at a stubborn weed, a sound as constant as her own heartbeat. The garden was Henry's sanctuary, where he'd spent years coaxing life from the soil, teaching Lily to plant seeds, telling her, "Patience makes things grow." Eleanor dried her hands, thinking of joining him, but the phone rang, a neighbor asking about a church fundraiser. She answered, half listening, her eyes on Henry. Then a thud. The hose he'd been holding fell, water pooling in the dirt. Henry clutched his chest, his face twisting in pain, and crumpled to the ground. Eleanor froze, the phone slipping from her hand, the neighbor's voice fading to static. "Henry," she whispered, then screamed, "Henry!" She ran outside, her knees protesting, her heart pounding like a drum. He lay still, his hat askew, eyes half open, his face pale against the dark soil. She dropped beside him, shaking his shoulders. "Henry, please, wake up. Don't do this." Her hands fumbled for her phone, still in the kitchen, and she stumbled back inside, dialing 911, her voice breaking. "My husband, he's not moving. Please hurry. 124 Maple Street." The operator's calm instructions blurred as Eleanor returned to Henry, cradling his head, her fingers trembling against his cooling skin. "Stay with me. Love," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The ambulance's wail cut through the quiet town, neighbors peering from windows, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Paramedics swarmed, their voices clipped and urgent. "Ma'am, step back," one said, as they pressed on Henry's chest, attached monitors, their movements mechanical yet frantic. Eleanor stood, trembling, watching the man who'd been her anchor reduced to a body on a stretcher. "We're taking him to St. Mary's." a paramedic said, not meeting her eyes. She nodded, climbing into the ambulance, clutching Henry's cold hand, whispering, "Don't leave me, Henry." Not yet. The ride was a nightmare of sirens and beeping machines. Eleanor sat rigid, her eyes fixed on Henry's still form, the paramedics' voices a distant hum. She saw his smile from that morning, his hand in hers, now limp under the oxygen mask. Her mind clung to fragments, his laugh, the coffee's warmth, Lily's party plans, refusing to accept the truth creeping in. Henry was her rock, the man who'd held her through miscarriages, Michael's rebellions, every storm. He couldn't be gone. Not like this. St. Mary's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting stark shadows on the linoleum floor. Eleanor sat in the ER waiting room, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. Henry's favorite, the soft green one he said matched her eyes. The double doors where they'd taken him loomed like a barrier, and she stared at them, willing them to open with good news. Her mind replayed the garden, Henry's laugh, then his fall, each loop tightening the knot in her chest, making it hard to breathe. Sarah arrived first, her work blazer wrinkled from the rush, her face pale. "Mom, what happened?" she asked, wrapping Eleanor in a tight hug. Eleanor recounted the morning in a flat voice, as if speaking could keep the truth at bay. "He was in the garden, then he just fell," she said, her words trailing off. Sarah listened, tears welling, but stayed composed, her hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder, a quiet anchor. David arrived next, his tool belt still on from a job site, his jaw tight. "They're working on him, right?" he asked, his voice steady but strained, more statement than question. Eleanor nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Michael stormed in last, his eyes bloodshot, his shirt untucked, the faint stench of beer clinging to him like a shadow. Eleanor's heart sank. She hadn't seen him in weeks, not since his latest relapse had driven a wedge between them. "Where is he?" Michael demanded, his voice loud, drawing stares from other waiting families. Sarah shushed him, her eyes sharp. "Michael, keep it down," she hissed. He ignored her, pacing like a caged animal, muttering, "This can't be happening." "Not Dad." Eleanor reached for his arm, seeking her son, the boy she'd raised, but he pulled away, his face a mask of rage and grief. "Michael, sit," she whispered, but he shook his head, his boots scuffing the floor. The waiting room was a limbo of plastic chairs and muted TV chatter, the air thick with tension. Eleanor's mind drifted to Henry, to the way he'd calm Michael during his teenage tantrums, his steady voice cutting through chaos. She needed that voice now, but all she had was the buzz of the lights and the weight of her children's silence. Sarah scrolled her phone, checking work emails, a nervous habit. David stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly. Michael's pacing grew erratic, his muttering louder, drawing annoyed glances. Eleanor wanted to pull them all close, to be the mother who fixed things, but she felt small, fragile, her world unraveling. The double doors swung open, and a doctor approached, her face unreadable under her surgical cap. "Mrs. Thompson?" Eleanor stood, her legs unsteady, Sarah and David flanking her like guards. Michael stopped pacing, hovering behind, his breathing ragged. "I'm Dr. Patel," the doctor said, her voice soft but final. "I'm so sorry. Henry suffered a massive heart attack. We did everything we could, but he didn't make it." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing Eleanor's breath. Her knees buckled. Sarah caught her, guiding her to a chair. David stared at the floor, his fists clenching, his silence louder than words. Michael let out a guttural sound, half sob, half scream, and kicked a chair, sending it skidding across the linoleum. "No, you're lying," he shouted, his face red, veins bulging. Dr. Patel stepped back, calm but firm. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Would you like to see him?" Eleanor's world blurred. She saw Henry smile from that morning, his hand in hers, the garden where they'd planned to grow old together. Gone. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body felt heavy, anchored by a grief too vast to name. Sarah held her, whispering, "We're here, Mom. We've got you." But Michael's pacing grew frantic, his muttering turning to shouts. "This is wrong. This is all wrong," he said, his voice rising, echoing in the sterile room. Eleanor looked at him, seeking the boy she'd rocked to sleep, the one who'd drawn her pictures, but saw only rage. "Michael, please," she whispered, reaching out, her voice trembling. He spun on her, his eyes wild, bloodshot, his face contorted. "You're gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up." The words sliced through her, sharp and venomous, each syllable a wound. Sarah gasped, "Michael, stop it." David grabbed his arm, his voice low. "That's enough, Mike." But Michael yanked free, his boots stomping as he stormed out, the double doors slamming behind him, leaving a ringing silence. Eleanor sat, stunned, her son's words echoing louder than the doctor's. "Your time's up." She felt Sarah's hand on hers, heard David's murmured apologies, but her mind was trapped in Michael's voice, cruel and raw. The waiting room closed in, the air too thick to breathe. She wanted Henry, his steady presence, his ability to soothe even Michael's worst storms. But Henry was gone, and now her son had turned her grief into a weapon. She stared at the double doors, half expecting Henry to walk through, but they remained still, sealing her loss. Sarah drove Eleanor home, the silence between them heavy as the July dusk settled over the town. The car's hum was the only sound, Sarah's hands tight on the wheel, her eyes flicking to Eleanor with worry. "Mom, I could stay tonight," Sarah offered, her voice soft, almost pleading. Eleanor shook her head, her throat too raw to explain. "I need to be alone," she said, the words a lie she clung to. Sarah hesitated, but nodded, pulling into the driveway of the small house on Maple Street. David had promised to call later, his voice tight with unspoken grief. Eleanor stepped out, the gravel crunching under her shoes, and waved Sarah off, watching the taillights fade. The house was a tomb of silence. Eleanor stood in the doorway, the familiar scent of wood polish and Henry's aftershave hitting her like a wave. His gardening gloves sat on the counter, his muddy boots by the door, as if he'd walk in any moment. She touched the gloves, expecting his warmth, finding only cold leather. The coffee pot held their morning brew, now bitter and stale, a cruel reminder of the day's start. She moved slowly, her joints aching, each step a journey through a house that no longer felt like home. She sank into Henry's armchair in the living room, its worn fabric smelling faintly of him. Cedar and earth, a scent that had always grounded her. Memories flooded in, unbidden, vivid. Their first date at a county fair. Henry winning her a stuffed bear, his grin boyish and proud. His proposal under an oak tree, his voice shaking as he promised forever. The births of their children. Michael, their firstborn, with his wide eyes and endless questions. Sarah, quiet and curious. David, always watching, always fixing. They'd built this life together, through lean years and loud arguments, through Michael's rebellions and Sarah's distance, through David's quiet strength. But Henry had been the glue, the one who held them together. Now he was gone. Michael's words echoed, louder than her grief. "You're gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up." She'd given him everything. Love through his teenage tantrums, patience through his addiction, second chances when he'd stolen from them to feed his habit. Yet today, in her rawest moment, he'd turned on her, his voice a blade. She wondered if he meant it, if he saw her as frail, expendable, a relic of a life he resented. At 68, she felt her age, her knees creaking, her heart fragile, her reflection showing lines etched by years of worry. Was he right? Was her time running out? Eleanor wandered the house, each room a ghost of Henry. The bedroom, where they'd whisper dreams under a quilt she'd sewn. The kitchen, where they'd danced to old records, Henry's steps clumsy but earnest. The garden, now a crime scene of loss, the dirt still damp where he'd fallen. She knelt there, the earth cool under her fingers, and whispered, "Why didn't I see it coming, Henry? Why couldn't I save you?" Tears fell, soaking the soil, her sobs the only sound in the quiet yard. Back inside, She found Henry's notepad on the porch, his handwriting scrawled with plans for Lily's party. Bounce house, chocolate cake, extra sprinkles. The sight broke her, a fresh wave of grief crashing over her. She clutched the notepad, sobbing, the sound echoing in the empty house. The phone rang, Sarah checking in, but Eleanor let it go to voicemail, unable to face her daughter's pity. She couldn't speak, not with Michael's words burning in her chest, not with Henry's absence a weight she couldn't carry. She thought of Michael as a boy, his laughter filling this house, his small hand in hers. He'd been her pride, her firstborn, the one who'd made her a mother. But addiction had stolen him, turning him into a stranger who saw her not as a mother, but as a target for his rage. She wondered what she'd done wrong, if her love had been too soft, her boundaries too weak. Had she failed him? Had she failed Henry, not seeing the signs of his heart giving out? As night fell, Eleanor sat in the dark, the house's silence pressing down like a physical force. She saw Henry's face, heard his laugh, then Michael's voice, cruel and sharp. The world she'd known, built with Henry, sustained by love, was gone. Her chest ached, not just with grief, but with the fear Michael's words had planted. Was she next? At 68, she'd never felt so mortal, so small. Yet, in the depths of her pain, a spark of defiance flickered. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. But tonight, all she could do was hold Henry's notepad, her tears smudging his handwriting, and weep for the life that had shattered in a single day. Eleanor woke to a house that felt wrong, the silence where Henry's morning hums should have been a fresh wound. The July sun filtered through the bedroom curtains, but its warmth couldn't touch the chill in her bones. At 68, she felt every ache, her knees stiff, her back protesting as she sat up, the weight of yesterday's loss pressing down. Henry was gone, his heart attack stealing him in an instant, and Michael's words, "You're gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up," echoed like a curse. She clutched the quilt she'd sewn for their 20th anniversary, its patches faded but soft, and buried her face in it, searching for his scent. It was there, faint, cedar and earth, but already fading. The kitchen was no better. The coffee pot sat untouched, Henry's mug still in the sink from their last morning. Eleanor stood at the counter, her hands trembling as she tried to make coffee, the routine now a mockery. She saw him everywhere, his gardening gloves on the counter, his boots by the door, the notepad with his scrawled plans for Lily's birthday. Chocolate cake, extra sprinkles. Her throat tightened, tears spilling as she traced his handwriting. She wanted to call him, to hear his voice, but the phone was silent, its screen dark. The doorbell jarred her. Sarah stood on the porch, her eyes red, holding a casserole dish from a neighbor. "Mrs. Carter dropped this off," Sarah said, stepping inside, her work blazer swapped for a soft sweater. "You didn't answer my calls last night." Eleanor forced a smile, her voice hoarse. "I just needed time." Sarah set the dish down, her gaze soft but searching. "You don't have to do this alone, Mom." Eleanor nodded, but Michael's words burned in her chest, a secret she couldn't share. She hadn't told Sarah or David about his outburst in the hospital, the way he'd turned her grief into a weapon. She feared their judgment. Would they think she provoked him, failed him as a mother? Sarah stayed, making tea, her presence a quiet comfort. But Eleanor's mind drifted to Michael, her firstborn, now a stranger at 40. She remembered him at 5, his chubby hands clutching her skirt, his laughter filling this house. He'd been bright, curious, always asking why the sky was blue, why flowers grew. But by 16, he'd changed, sneaking out, lying his eyes glassy from drugs. Henry had been the one to pull him back, with tough love and late-night talks. Eleanor had been softer, maybe too soft, believing love could fix him. Now, with Henry gone, Michael's rage had turned on her, and she wondered if she'd lost him for good. The phone rang, shattering her thoughts. It was David, his voice clipped. "Mom, we need to talk about the funeral. Can I come by?" "Of course," Eleanor said, her stomach nodding. She didn't want to plan a funeral, to make Henry's absence official, but she had no choice. Sarah touched her arm. "I'll stay, help you through it." Eleanor nodded, but the weight of Michael's absence loomed. Where was he? Had he meant those words, or was it just grief and addiction talking? She wanted her son, not the man who'd screamed at her, but both felt impossibly far away. David arrived, his tool belt gone, replaced by a clean shirt, his face drawn. I called the funeral home, he said, sitting at the kitchen table. They can meet us tomorrow. We need to decide, cremation or burial, service details. His voice was practical, but his eyes betrayed his pain. Eleanor listened, her hands clasped tightly, trying to focus. She saw Henry in David's jawline, his steady hands, and it hurt to look at him. What about Michael? Eleanor asked, her voice small. David's jaw tightened. Haven't heard from him. He's probably, Sarah sighed, stirring her tea. He's a mess, Mom. Always has been. Eleanor flinched, the words too close to her own fears. She wanted to defend Michael, to say he was hurting, but his outburst stopped her. Your time's up. She felt old, fragile, as if his words had aged her overnight. The conversation turned to logistics, flowers, music, a pastor, but Eleanor's mind was elsewhere, trapped in the hospital, in Michael's rage, in Henry's still face. The funeral home smelled of lilies and polished wood, a sterile contrast to the chaos in Eleanor's heart. She sat between Sarah and David in the director's office, a small room with beige walls and a box of tissues on the desk. The director, Mr. Evans, was kind but businesslike, his voice smooth as he listed options, caskets, urns, service times. Eleanor nodded, her hands twisting in her lap, but the words blurred. She saw Henry smile, his hand in hers, not a body to be planned for. We should do a simple service, David said, flipping through a brochure. Dad wasn't flashy. Church, maybe the community center after. Sarah agreed, her voice soft. He loved hymns. Amazing Grace, definitely. Eleanor tried to contribute, but her mind drifted to Michael. She hadn't heard from him since the hospital, his absence a gaping wound. She pictured him in his apartment, surrounded by empty bottles, his eyes hollow. Had he meant to hurt her, or was it the drugs, the grief? She wanted to believe he was still her boy, the one who'd drawn her pictures, but his words, "You're gonna die too, Ma," felt like a wall between them. Mom, Sarah's voice cut through. What do you think about the obituary? Eleanor blinked, her throat tight. Henry would want it honest. He was a good man, loved his family, his garden. Her voice broke, and Sarah squeezed her hand. Mr. Evans scribbled notes, his pen scratching like Henry's had on his notepad. The memory stung, and Eleanor excused herself, stepping outside for air. The parking lot was quiet, the July heat pressing down. Eleanor leaned against the building, her chest tight. She remembered Michael at 18, arrested for possession, Henry bailing him out, his face stern but hopeful. He's our son, Ellie, Henry had said. We don't give up. She clung to that, through relapses, rehab, stolen money. But now, with Henry gone, she felt alone in her fight for Michael. His outburst wasn't just anger. It was a betrayal, a rejection of her love, her life. Back inside, Sarah and David finalized details. A Tuesday service, a small reception, no open casket. Eleanor nodded, her input minimal, her energy drained. As they left, Sarah suggested lunch at the diner, but Eleanor shook her head. I need to see Lily, she said. I need something good. Sarah hesitated, her eyes worried. She's with Michael's ex, Tara. I'll call, see if you can visit. Eleanor's heart lifted, then sank. Lily, Michael's daughter, was her light, but what if Michael had poisoned her too? She pushed the thought away, clinging to the image of Lily's gap-toothed smile. At Tara's apartment, Lily ran to Eleanor, her arms wide. Grandma, she squealed, hugging her tightly. But as they sat on the couch, Lily's chatter slowed, her eyes darting away. Daddy said you're old, Grandma, that you might not be here long. Her voice was small, her words a knife. Eleanor's breath caught, Michael's cruelty rippling through his child. She forced a smile, stroking Lily's hair. I'm here now, sweetheart, and I'm not going anywhere. Lily nodded, but her eyes held doubt, a shadow of Michael's words. Eleanor left, her heart heavier, the drive home a blur of tears. Michael hadn't just hurt her. He'd tainted her bond with Lily, her reason to keep going. Back home, Eleanor's house felt emptier, the silence mocking her. She avoided Henry's armchair, its presence too raw, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the casserole dish Sarah had left. The phone buzzed with texts, neighbors offering condolences, church friends promising prayers, but she couldn't respond. Michael's absence, his words, Lily's fear, all swirled in her mind, a storm she couldn't escape. A knock at the door startled her. Clara, her neighbor of 20 years, stood there, her gray hair pulled back, a plate of cookies in hand. "I won't stay," Clara said, her voice gentle. "Just wanted to check on you." Eleanor let her in, the warmth of Clara's presence a small relief. They sat, sipping tea, and Clara listened as Eleanor spoke haltingly of Henry, his laugh, his garden, his love for Lily. She didn't mention Michael, the shame too deep, but Clara's eyes held understanding. "You don't have to be strong yet, Ellie," she said. "Just keep breathing." Eleanor nodded, tears falling. Clara's kindness was a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. After Clara left, Eleanor wandered to the bedroom, opening Henry's dresser. His shirts smelled of him, and she held one, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. Tucked in a drawer, she found a letter, its envelope yellowed, addressed to her in Henry's scrawl. Her hand shook as she opened it, the paper crinkling. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. You're the strongest person I know. Keep going, no matter what. I love you always." Henry, the words broke her, but they also stirred something deep, a spark of resolve. Henry had believed in her, even when she doubted herself. She clutched the letter, sobbing, but feeling a faint shift, a determination to honor him. Michael's words still stung, but Henry's love was louder, at least for now. That night, Eleanor lay awake, the house creaking around her. She saw Michael's face, twisted with rage, and Lily's, clouded with fear. She thought of Sarah's quiet support, David's steady presence, Clara's kindness. The funeral loomed, a task she dreaded, but Henry's letter gave her a purpose. She wasn't ready to forgive Michael, not yet, but she wouldn't let his words define her. She whispered into the dark, "I'm still here, Henry. I'll try." The words were fragile, but they were enough for tonight. Eleanor woke to darkness, the clock glowing 3:17 a.m., the silence of her house a heavy blanket. The bed felt vast without Henry, his side cold, the quilt they'd shared for decades now a reminder of his absence. At 68, Eleanor's body ached, her joints stiff, her chest tight, but it was the ache in her soul that kept her awake. Henry's death a week ago had shattered her world, and Michael's words, "You're gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up," had lodged in her heart like shrapnel. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the hospital, Michael's bloodshot eyes, his voice sharp with rage. She rose, her slippers scuffing the floor, and shuffled to the kitchen. The coffee pot sat unused, a relic of mornings with Henry. She boiled water for tea instead, the kettle's whistle a lonely sound. The kitchen window framed the garden where Henry had collapsed, the tomato plants drooping under the July heat. She saw him there, his straw hat bobbing, his hands in the soil. "Patience makes things grow," he'd told Lily, his voice warm. Now, the garden was a graveyard of memories, and Eleanor turned away, her tea cooling untouched. Michael consumed her thoughts. She hadn't seen him since the hospital, his absence a gaping wound. She called his phone, left voicemails. "Michael, please, we need to talk," but got only silence. She pictured him in his apartment, surrounded by empty bottles, his life unraveling as hers had. Had he meant those words, or was it grief, addiction, speaking? She wanted her son back, the boy who'd clung to her, but the man who'd screamed at her felt like a stranger. Eleanor pulled on a cardigan, Henry's favorite, soft green, and drove to Michael's apartment, a rundown complex on the edge of town. The morning air was heavy, the sky gray with impending rain. She knocked, her heart pounding, but no answer came. She knocked again, louder, her voice trembling. "Michael? It's Mom." Silence. A neighbor peeked out, shaking her head. He's been gone since yesterday, she said. Saw him leave, looked rough. Eleanor's stomach sank. She left a note under his door. Please call me. I love you. But as she drove home, despair settled in. Michael was slipping away, and she didn't know how to reach him. Back home, Sarah called, her voice tense. Mom, you okay? You didn't answer last night. I'm fine. Eleanor lied, her throat tight. She hadn't told Sarah or David about Michael's outburst, the shame too deep. What would they think? That she'd failed as a mother, that she provoked him? Sarah pressed, come to dinner tonight. You shouldn't be alone. Eleanor agreed, but the thought of facing her children, of hiding Michael's words, felt like a weight she couldn't carry. She remembered Henry's letter, found after the funeral. Keep going, no matter what. She wanted to honor him, but Michael's absence, his cruelty, made it feel impossible. Her chest ached, a sharp pang that stopped her breath. She sat, clutching the table, fear creeping in. Was Michael right? Was her time running out? At 68, she'd never thought much about death, but now it loomed, fueled by grief and his words. She called her doctor, her voice shaking, scheduling an appointment. Just to be safe, she said, but the fear lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. The community center smelled of coffee and old carpet, its folding chairs arranged in a circle for the grief support group. Eleanor hesitated at the door, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Clara, her neighbor, had suggested the group, saying, it helped me when my Tom passed. Eleanor had resisted, but the silence of her house, the weight of Michael's words, pushed her here. She wore a simple dress, her silver braid neat, but felt exposed, like a stranger in her own life. The group was small, 8 people, mostly older, their faces etched with loss. The facilitator, Joan, a soft-spoken woman with gray curls, welcomed Eleanor with a smile. We're glad you're here, she said. Share when you're ready. Eleanor nodded, taking a seat, her hands clasped tightly. The room felt warm, but she shivered, Michael's words, your time's up, echoing in her mind. One by one, they shared. A man in his 70s spoke of losing his wife to cancer, his voice steady, but his eyes wet. A younger woman described her brother's car accident, her hands shaking as she clutched a tissue. Eleanor listened, their stories a mirror to her pain, but different. They'd lost loved ones, but none spoke of betrayal, of a child turning on them in their darkest moment. She felt alone. Even here, her grief tangled with shame. When it was her turn, Eleanor hesitated, her throat tight. My husband, Henry, died last week, she said, her voice barely audible. Heart attack. It was sudden. The group nodded, their eyes kind, but she stopped short of mentioning Michael. How could she explain his outburst, the way it had fractured her? Joan prompted gently. What's been the hardest part? Eleanor swallowed, tears welling. The quiet, she said, and feeling like I've lost more than just him. It was as close as she could get, and the group murmured support, but she felt like an outsider, her secret isolating her. After the meeting, Joan approached, offering a pamphlet. You don't have to share everything, she said, but writing helps. Try journaling your thoughts. Eleanor took the pamphlet, doubtful but grateful. As she drove home, the group's stories lingered. Loss was universal, but her betrayal felt unique, a wound she couldn't name. Her chest ached again, sharper this time, and she gripped the steering wheel, fear spiking. At the doctor's office later, the nurse checked her vitals, her face neutral. Stress can do a number on you, she said, scheduling tests. Grief hits the body hard. Eleanor nodded, but Michael's words haunted her. They're gonna die too, making every twinge feel like a prophecy. She left, clutching the appointment card, her fear a constant companion. That evening, at Sarah's house, Eleanor tried to act normal, but the effort drained her. Sarah's kitchen was warm, filled with the scent of roasted chicken, but the absence of Michael hung heavy. David was there, quiet as always, helping set the table. Any word from Mike? He asked, his voice low. Eleanor shook her head, her heart sinking. Not yet. Sarah sighed, chopping vegetables. He's probably off somewhere, messed up. Typical. Eleanor flinched, the criticism too close to her own guilt. She wanted to tell them about Michael's outburst, to unburden herself, but fear stopped her. Would they blame her? Think she pushed him too far? She stayed silent, the weight of her secret growing. Eleanor drove to Tara's apartment the next day, desperate to see Lily, to reclaim something good. The July heat pressed down, the air thick with the promise of rain. Tara greeted her, her face tired but kind. "Lily's been asking for you," she said, stepping aside. Lily ran to Eleanor, her hug fierce, but her eyes held a flicker of fear. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked, her voice small. Eleanor forced a smile, kneeling to her level. "I'm right here, sweetheart." They sat on the couch, coloring together, Lily's crayons scattered across the coffee table. But Lily's chatter was hesitant, her glances wary. "Daddy said you're old," she whispered, not meeting Eleanor's eyes. "That you might go away like Grandpa." Eleanor's heart broke, Michael's words poisoning even this bond. She took Lily's hand, her voice steady despite the ache. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I promise." Lily nodded, but the doubt lingered, a shadow Eleanor couldn't erase. They colored in silence, the act a fragile bridge, but Eleanor left with a heavy heart, Michael's reach extending beyond his absence. Back home, the house felt colder, the silence louder. Eleanor tried calling Michael again, her voicemail pleading, "Please, Michael, just talk to me." No response. She sat at the kitchen table, Joan's pamphlet in hand, and opened a notebook. Her pen hovered, then moved, words spilling out. Henry's laugh, the garden, Michael's rage, her fear. Writing felt raw, like peeling skin, but it gave her pain a shape, a place to rest. Clara stopped by again, bringing a loaf of bread, her presence a quiet comfort. "You look tired, Ellie," she said, sitting across from her. "Talk to me." Eleanor hesitated, then spoke of Henry, the funeral, Lily's fear, but not Michael's outburst. Clara listened, her eyes kind. "You're carrying a lot," she said. "Let others help." Eleanor nodded, tears falling. Clara's words, like Henry's letter, stirred something. A need. The July air hung heavy, thick with humidity, as Eleanor drove to Michael's apartment, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The sky was bruised with clouds, mirroring the storm in her heart. 3 weeks had passed since Henry's death, since Michael's venomous words. "I'm gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up," had cut her open. She'd avoided this moment, fearing his rage, her own pain, but Henry's dream voice, "You're stronger than you know," Ellie, pushed her forward. She needed to face her son, to understand why he'd turned on her, even if it broke her again. Michael's apartment complex loomed, a gray slab of peeling paint and cracked windows on the edge of town. Eleanor parked, her heart pounding, her green cardigan, Henry's favorite, clinging to her skin in the heat. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier, and knocked on his door, the sound sharp in the quiet morning. No answer. She knocked again, her voice trembling. "Michael, it's Mom. Open the door." A shuffle inside, then silence. She pounded harder, desperation rising. "Michael, please." The door creaked open, revealing Michael, disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, a faded t-shirt hanging off his frame. The apartment reeked of stale beer and unwashed clothes, bottles scattered on the floor. "What do you want?" he muttered, his voice slurred, avoiding her eyes. Eleanor stepped inside, her resolve wavering, but holding. "We need to talk. About Dad. About what you said." Michael scoffed, slumping onto his sagging couch. "Nothing to say. He's gone. That's it." Her chest tightened, his dismissal a fresh wound. "You screamed at me, Michael. In the hospital. You said my time's up." Her voice broke, tears welling. "Why? Why would you say that to me?" Michael's face twisted, a mix of guilt and defiance. "I was upset, Ma. Dad was dead. I didn't mean it." "Didn't mean it?" Eleanor's voice rose, trembling with years of pain. "You broke my heart, Michael. I lost Henry, and then you made me feel like I was nothing." He stood, pacing, his hands raking through his hair. "You don't get it. Everything's falling apart. Dad was the only one who. He stopped, his voice cracking, and for a moment, Eleanor saw her boy, the one who'd clung to her, scared of the dark. But then his eyes hardened. You're always so perfect, Ma. Always holding it together. Maybe I just wanted you to feel it too. Eleanor reeled, his words a slap. Feel it? I feel it every second, Michael. I lost my husband, and now I'm losing you. Tears streamed down her face, but she stood tall, Henry's strength in her bones. I've loved you through everything. Your lies, your stealing, your lapses. But this was cruel. Michael's shoulders sagged, his voice low. I am sorry, okay? I don't know. He sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands. I miss him, Ma. I don't know how to do this. Eleanor wanted to hold him, to forgive, but the hurt was too raw. I miss him too, she said, her voice steady despite the ache. But you don't get to hurt me because you're hurting. You need help, Michael. More than I can give. She turned to leave, her heart heavy but lighter, the confrontation a release. As she reached the door, he whispered, I didn't mean it, Ma. She paused, nodding but didn't look back. The drive home was quiet, the storm in her heart easing, if only slightly. Eleanor returned home, the confrontation with Michael lingering like a bruise. The house was still, Henry's absence a constant ache, but she felt a shift, a spark of courage from facing her son. She needed something good, something to anchor her, and that meant Lily. Michael's words had tainted their bond, telling his daughter Eleanor was too old to last, but Eleanor refused to let him steal that too. She called Tara, Lily's mother, and arranged a visit, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. Tara's apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of baking bread. Lily ran to Eleanor, her hug fierce, her gap-toothed smile a balm. Grandma, can we make cookies? She asked, her eyes bright but cautious. Michael's words still a shadow. Eleanor smiled, kneeling to her level. Chocolate chip, just like Grandpa liked. Lily nodded, her ponytail bouncing, and they set to work in the kitchen, flour dusting their hands. Eleanor guided Lily's small fingers, measuring sugar, cracking eggs, the simple act of bridge between them. Grandpa used to sneak the dough, Eleanor said, her voice soft. He'd pretend I didn't see. Lily giggled, her caution easing. He always gave me some too. Eleanor's heart swelled, Henry's memory a thread connecting them. She told stories, Henry teaching Lily to plant seeds, his silly dances in the garden, and Lily listened, her eyes wide, her fear softening. But the shadow lingered. As they shaped cookies, Lily's voice dropped. Daddy said you're old, Grandma, that you might go away. Her hand stilled, her eyes on the dough. Eleanor's breath caught, Michael's cruelty cutting anew. She took Lily's hands, her voice gentle but firm. Sweetheart, I'm here. I'm old, sure, but I'm strong. I'm not going anywhere. Lily looked up, her eyes searching. Promise. Promise, Eleanor said, pulling her close, her heart aching but resolute. They baked, laughed, ate warm cookies, the kitchen filled with light. When Eleanor left, Lily hugged her tightly, whispering, I love you, Grandma. It was a small victory, a crack in the wall Michael had built. Back home, Sarah called, her voice sharp with worry. Mom, Tara told me about Michael. What he said to Lily. Did he say something to you too? Eleanor froze, the secret she'd guarded since the hospital threatening to spill. He was upset, she said, her voice tight. Grief does things. Sarah's silence was heavy. He's out of control, Mom. You should stay away from him. Eleanor's chest tightened, torn between her love for Michael and the pain he'd caused. He's my son, she said softly. I can't give up on him. Sarah sighed, her voice softening. Just be careful, okay? Eleanor nodded, though Sarah couldn't see. She couldn't abandon Michael, not after all they'd been through, but she knew she had to protect herself, her heart, her bond with Lily. The balance felt impossible, but Lily's hug, her laughter, gave her strength to try. Eleanor returned to the grief support group at the community center, her notebook tucked in her purse, Joan's suggestion to journal now a lifeline. The room was familiar, coffee brewing, chairs in a circle, faces etched with loss. She'd come to listen, but today felt different. Michael's remorse, however fleeting, and Lily's trust, however fragile, had stirred something in her, a need to speak, to reclaim her story. The group shared as always, a widow's quiet tears, a father's anger at a drunk driver, stories of pain that echoed Eleanor's, but couldn't touch her unique wound. When her turn came, she hesitated, her hands trembling. "I lost my husband, Henry," she began, her voice low. "And then my son. He said things, hurtful things, that I die soon." The words spilled out, raw and jagged, the first time she'd spoken them aloud. The group listened, their eyes kind, no judgment in their silence. Joan nodded, her voice gentle. "That's a heavy burden, Eleanor. Thank you for sharing." The act of speaking lifted a weight, however small. A woman across the circle, Mary, reached out after, her hand warm on Eleanor's. "My daughter blamed me when her dad died," she said. "It's not you. It's their pain talking." Eleanor nodded, tears falling, the connection a balm. She felt seen, her secret no longer a cage. At the doctor's office, tests revealed her chest pains were stress, not a death sentence. "Your heart's strong," the doctor said, prescribing rest, maybe therapy. "Grief can mimic a heart attack." Eleanor left, relief mingling with fear. Michael's words had planted doubt, but her body wasn't giving up. She drove to Henry's gravesite, the cemetery quiet, the air thick with rain's promise. His headstone was simple, his name etched in stone, a finality she still couldn't accept. She knelt, her fingers tracing his name, tears falling. "I faced him, Henry," she whispered. "Michael. I told him how he hurt me. I'm trying to be strong, like you said." She spoke of Lily, the cookies, the group, her voice a mix of grief and resolve. "I'm not done yet. Not for you. Not for Lily." The wind stirred, a soft breeze, and she felt him, his presence a whisper in her heart. She stood, her knees aching, but her spirit lighter. She vowed to live, not just for Henry, but for herself, for the grandchildren who needed her. Back home, Eleanor opened her notebook, her pen moving faster now. She wrote of Michael's apology, Lily's laughter, the group's kindness. The words were messy, raw, but they were hers. She saw a future, not clear but possible, a life where Michael's words didn't define her, where Henry's love did. The storm wasn't over, but she'd faced it, and that was enough for now. The late July sun rose over the small Midwest town, casting a soft glow through Eleanor Thompson's kitchen window. At 68, she moved with a quiet purpose, her hands no longer trembling as she brewed tea instead of coffee, a small shift from the mornings she'd shared with Henry. The house still felt empty without him, his gardening gloves on the counter, his boots by the door, but the silence was less suffocating now, a month after his death. Michael's words, "You're gonna die too, Ma. Your time's up," still lingered, but they were softer, overshadowed by Henry's dream voice. "You're stronger than you know, Ellie." Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her notebook open, pages filled with her grief, her confrontation with Michael, her bond with Lily. Writing had become her lifeline, a way to name the pain and reclaim her strength. She'd faced Michael, seen his fleeting remorse, and while it hadn't healed the wound, it had given her clarity. She couldn't save him, not alone, but she could protect herself, her heart, her life. The phone rang, jarring her. It was Tara, Michael's ex, her voice hesitant. "Eleanor, Michael's in rehab. Checked in yesterday. He asked me to tell you." Eleanor's breath caught, a mix of relief and wariness. "Is he okay?" "He's trying," Tara said. "Said he wants to make things right. With you, with Lily." Eleanor's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him, to see her boy again, but his words had cut too deep. "Thank you, Tara," she said, her voice steady. "Tell him, I'm glad he's getting help, but I need time." Tara paused, then nodded through the phone. "I'll tell him. Take care, Eleanor." She hung up, her hands trembling slightly. Rehab was a step, but she'd seen Michael try before, only to fall again. She thought of Henry, his patience with Michael's relapses, his belief in second chances. But Henry was gone, and Eleanor couldn't carry that burden alone anymore. She opened her notebook, Writing, Michael's in rehab. I want to hope, but I have to protect myself. For Lily, for me. The words felt like a vow, a boundary she'd never set before. Sarah arrived later, her face softer than usual, a grocery bag in hand. Thought I'd make dinner, she said, setting out ingredients for lasagna, Henry's favorite. David's coming too. Eleanor smiled, grateful for her children's presence, but Michael's absence hung heavy. She hadn't told Sarah or David about his outburst, but Sarah's call after learning about Lily's fear suggested she suspected something. As they chopped vegetables, Sarah's voice was casual but probing. Heard from Michael? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. He's in rehab. Tara called. Sarah's knife paused, her eyes sharp. Good. But Mom, you don't have to fix him. Not after everything. Eleanor's throat tightened, Sarah's words echoing her own resolve. I know, she said softly. I'm trying to let go, just a little. David arrived, his quiet presence steadying the room. They ate, the lasagna warm and comforting, but the conversation skirted Michael, focusing on Lily's school, the garden, small things. Eleanor felt the shift, her children protecting her, as she'd once protected them. After dinner, she spoke, her voice firm. I love Michael, but I can't keep chasing him. Not anymore. Sarah reached for her hand, her eyes wet. You're allowed to choose yourself, Mom. David nodded, his voice low. Dad would say the same. Eleanor's heart ached, but their support was a balm, a reminder she wasn't alone. She thought of Henry's letter. Keep going, no matter what, and felt a resolve solidify. Michael's redemption was his to earn. Her job was to live. Eleanor stood in the community center, stringing fairy lights along the rafters, her hands steady despite the ache in her joints. The idea for a memorial for Henry had come after her last grief group, a way to honor him, to gather the community that loved him. It was late July, the air thick with heat, but the center buzzed with volunteers, neighbors, church friends, even Lily's teacher, arranging tables, setting out photos of Henry. Eleanor had chosen the park for the event, wanting open sky, a place Henry loved, but rain had forced them inside. Sarah and David helped, hanging banners, arranging flowers, lilies, Henry's favorite. Lily darted around, her ponytail bouncing, taping drawings to the walls. Pictures of Henry in his garden, smiling with her. Grandpa would love this, she said, her voice bright. No trace of the fear Michael had planted. Eleanor hugged her, her heart swelling. He would, sweetheart. He's here, you know. Lily nodded, her eyes shining. I feel him too. The memorial was simple but heartfelt, a slideshow of Henry's life, hymns he loved, stories from those who knew him. Eleanor stood at the front, her notebook in hand, her heart pounding. She'd written a speech, her words a mix of love and loss. And though she feared speaking, she felt Henry's strength urging her on. Henry was my home, she began, her voice trembling but clear. He loved this town, his garden, our family. He taught me to keep going, no matter what. She paused, tears falling, but the crowd's warmth, nods, smiles, soft applause carried her through. Clara, her neighbor, spoke next, sharing how Henry had helped her fix her fence, his laughter filling her yard. Others followed, stories of Henry's kindness, his quiet humor, his love for Lily. Eleanor listened, her heart full, Henry's presence vivid in their words. The room sang Amazing Grace, the hymn echoing, and Eleanor felt him beside her, his hand in hers, a memory so real it hurt. After, the community lingered, sharing food, Eleanor's chocolate cake, extra sprinkles for Lily, and memories. Lily tugged Eleanor's sleeve, holding out a drawing, a family under a tree, Henry smile bright, Eleanor beside him, Lily and her cousins holding hands. For you, Grandma, she said, her eyes wide. So you remember we're all together. Eleanor's tears fell, the drawing a gift, a healing. Thank you, Lily, she whispered, hugging her tightly. The memorial wasn't just for Henry. It was for her a reclaiming of love, of family, despite the fractures. Sarah and David stood by her, their presence steady. You did good, Mom, David said, his voice soft. Sarah nodded, her eyes wet. Dad'll be proud. Eleanor smiled, the weight of their support anchoring her. Michael wasn't there, but his absence felt less sharp, softened by the community's love, Lily's drawing, her own strength. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, her notebook now a memoir, pages filled with her journey. Henry's death, Michael's betrayal, Lily's love, the community's embrace. The grief group had encouraged her to share it, and she'd read excerpts, her voice growing stronger with each meeting. Joan, the facilitator, had called it powerful, urging her to keep writing, maybe publish. Your story matters, Joan said, and Eleanor believed her, a spark of purpose igniting. She visited Henry's gravesite, the cemetery quiet, the air cooler as August approached. She knelt, her fingers tracing his name, the stone warm under the sun. I'm doing it, Henry, she said, her voice steady. I'm living, for me, for Lily, for us. She told him of the memorial, Lily's drawing, Michael's rehab. I don't know if he'll make it, but I'm here, and I'm enough. The breeze stirred, and she felt him, his love a constant, even in absence. Back home, Eleanor baked with Lily, their laughter filling the kitchen, a new routine. She taught Lily Henry's gardening tricks, planting seeds in the backyard, patience making things grow. Sarah and David visited often, their bond stronger, Michael's shadow less heavy. When Tara called with updates, Michael staying sober, attending meetings, Eleanor listened, hopeful but guarded. Tell him I'm rooting for him, she said, her boundary firm. She'd love him, but from a distance, her heart protected. One evening, Eleanor sat on the porch, the fairy lights from the memorial now strung in her yard, twinkling under the stars. She sipped tea, the air soft, the town quiet. Her notebook lay beside her, a story of survival, of a grandmother who'd faced loss and betrayal and found her voice. She thought of Henry's letter, his love, and Lily's drawing, their family eternal in crayon. Michael's words, "Your time's up," were a faint echo, drowned by her own resolve, her community's warmth, her grandchildren's love. Eleanor looked at the stars, feeling Henry's presence, not in grief but in peace. She was 68, her body worn but her spirit alive. Her time wasn't up. It was hers to shape, to live, to love. She whispered into the night, "I'm here, Henry, and I'm okay." The words were a promise, a new dawn, and she knew she'd keep it. Like, share, and subscribe channel. Thanks for watching.